Hi, today there will be another scary story. It's about the forest. So enjoy. About 15 years ago, my friend Valentin was a typical successful young man from Moscow. His parents were well off. He had a nice apartment, and after graduation, he already had a promising job waiting for him. Valentin was studying at Moscow State University at one of its more prestigious faculties, but unexpectedly he transferred to our geography department. He said he wanted to see more of the country. His parents tried everything they could to convince him not to do it, but he wouldn't listen. Not long after that, Valentin met two guys who were obsessed with finding the legendary Bigfoot. Igor and Sasha traveled to places where people claimed to have seen the creature. They studied books and reports about it and spent a lot of time discussing possible sightings. They were the ones who convinced Valentin to travel with them to the Russian north, to one of the most remote areas they could find. People were supposedly reported seeing something strange in the forest more often than anywhere else. When they arrived in a small village, Valentin quickly realized that his companions weren't nearly as enthusiastic as they had made themselves out to be. They went into the nearest forest a couple of times, but whenever the conversation turned into hiking dozens of kilometers deep into the taiga, Igor and Sasha suddenly lost interest. Drinking homemade liquor with a local man, accompanied by generous amounts of the village food, turned out to be much more appealing to them. During one of the trips, Igor and Sasha got drunk inside an old hunting cabin. Valentin joined them, although he wasn't particularly interested in drinking. The following evening, they started walking back toward the village. They were drunk, walking through the forest in the dark, singing at the top of their lungs. But for some reason, Valentin began to feel uneasy. Finally, he asked them, "Guys, can we keep it down a little? Something does not feel right." Igor laughed. "What are you, a little kid?" They kept going. Igor and Sasha continued singing, while Valentin walked several steps behind them, quietly praying. The daylight gradually disappeared, when Valentin suddenly felt that there was someone nearby, not behind a tree, not somewhere in the bushes. It felt as if something was surrounding them from every direction. He wanted to turn around, but he couldn't. He was so frightened, but he physically could not make himself look back. So he kept walking and quietly recited prayers until they finally came out of the forest. They returned to the village and went back to the forest's house. Igor and Sasha immediately went to sleep. Valentin stayed in the kitchen, drinking tea with the owner of the house, Nikolai Stepanovich. "Uncle Kolya, there is something I don't understand," Valentin said. "Ever since we were kids, people always told us, 'Don't yell, you are not in the forest.' But now, that I'm actually in the forest, I don't even feel like yelling, even when there is apparently nobody around." Those two guys were walking through the darkness, drunk, singing as loudly as they could. How weren't they scared? I don't know how to explain it. It feels like the forest is alive, like it's listening to you, like it's watching you. Nikolai Stepanovich listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Remember when you asked me if anyone from the village had ever seen it? Yes, you never answered me. That's because nobody here talks about it." He smiled faintly, and that's the right thing to do. You'll leave eventually, but we have to stay here. Still, I can see that you understand the forest a little. So, I will tell you a story. People around here have remembered it for years, and I personally knew a man it happened to. Back in Soviet times, a professor used to visit our area quite often. I don't remember exactly what he was. A biologist, perhaps, or a geologist, but he liked hunting, fishing, and picking mushrooms. Last summer he arrived with a large man in his 40s, a university associate professor, who had come specifically to fish for trout. Trout could only be found in a few rivers, and reaching them meant walking 2 or 3 days through the taiga. So we went deep into the forest. They traveled so far that they stopped seeing our people altogether. Eventually, they reached a lake and found an old, half-collapsed hunting cabin. They caught some fish, rested for a while, and later decided to walk around the lake, looking for mushrooms. They were almost halfway around it when they suddenly noticed several bear cubs playing in the grass. Then they heard a terrible roar behind them. A mother bear appeared. The men immediately realized how serious the situation was. They dropped their basket and ran toward the lake. Fortunately, they noticed an old boat hiding among the reeds. Apparently, fishermen had abandoned it there hours earlier. The 2 men jumped inside, grabbed the oars, and began rowing away from the snorer as quickly as they could. Only after they had pushed away from land, they realized that the boat was in terrible condition. It was leaking badly. It was already filling with water. The bear followed them in the shallows. She was getting closer. The men began to realize they might not make it, and when something came out of the forest, they later described it as enormous, almost 4 meters tall, covered in gray hair. Its eyes appeared to have a strange reddish glow. It moved over the bear with incredible speed. In just a few seconds, it caught up with her. What happened next was so frightening that neither man was ever able to describe it in much detail. The creature overpowered the bear almost instantly. The 2 men simply froze when they remembered that the boat was sinking. According to the professor, they had never worked so quickly in their lives. They scooped water out with their hands and whatever they could find, rowing at the same time. When they finally reached the shore, they jumped out of the boat and ran straight back to the cabin. They locked themselves inside and stayed there until morning, but the strangest thing happened afterward. When they finally dared to open the door, they found their mushroom basket sitting right outside. The mushrooms they had dropped while running were all there. But that wasn't the strangest part. The area around the cabin was covered with broken branches and wet mud. It looked as though something enormous had moved through the forest. Yet, neither man had heard a single sound during the night. No footsteps, no branches breaking, nothing, and there were no tracks. They left the forest immediately. They walking without stopping until they finally reached people. They reached me. I was working at the remote forest station at the time. The professor kept asking me the same question. Why had that creature saved them? Why had it returned their mushrooms? I told him honestly that I did not know. Maybe it somehow understood that they were harmless, but things did not always happen that way in our forest. I knew some men who worked in the forestry service in a neighboring district. There was a forester there who did not really care about the forest at all. He was more interested in organizing drinking parties or visiting officials. He shot enormous numbers of capercaillies and used explosives to kill fish, whatever it took to impress his important guest. Then, one day, Someone at the nearby settlement heard him calling over the radio. He was screaming, not shooting, screaming, like someone was tearing him apart. When the radio went silent, a search party was sent into the taiga. Several hours later, they found the forester near his cabin. He was dead. His hair had turned completely white. His eyes were open. There wasn't a scratch on his body. The doctors later concluded that he had died from cardiac arrest. Nobody ever found out what he had seen, but the hunters who knew the area said the same thing. They believed the master of the forest had punished him. They said that the forest had its own rules, and that sometimes the forest punished people who treated it with contempt. Nikolai Stepanovich stopped talking and lit another cigarette. But who is the master? Valentin asked. Is it some kind of animal? Or maybe a wild man? No, Nikolai Stepanovich said. It's not an animal. And it's not some hominid like you scientists like to call it. They will never catch it, because it's smarter than we are. People who have encountered it understood one thing. The master always let you know when you are allowed to see him. I don't know how. Maybe it's something you feel in your mind. But he can make you walk within a few feet of him and never notice anything. And you must never look directly into his eyes. There is only one name you should use for him, the master. Sometimes you won't see him at all, but you will understand that you are no longer welcome in the forest, and when that happens, you leave. Quickly. Nikolai paused. I made the mistake of not listening once. I knew I should leave, but I stayed. I almost became sick. My vision went dark and I barely made it out. After that, hunting and fishing seemed to go wrong for me for a long time. But the next time it happened, I understood the warning. I left immediately. And just before I reached the edge of the taiga, something happened. The forest opened itself to me. Valentin, you can't imagine what it was like. Everything suddenly seemed brighter. The colors were unlike anything I had ever seen. It lasted only a few minutes, but during those few minutes I understood everything. Every tree, every blade of grass, every sound. I could feel the entire forest, as if it were one living thing. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. I understood that the master had allowed me to experience it because I had listened to him. So, you did see him? Valentin asked. Nikolai shook his head. No, I never saw him, but my son Kostya did. Kostya had known the forest since he was a little boy. He wasn't afraid of wolves. He wasn't afraid of bears. He could walk through the taiga as if he had been born there. But one day he was picking cranberries in a swamp when he noticed a huge footprint. It clearly wasn't a bear. And then Nikolai stopped. What? Valentin asked. Did he see it? No, he didn't see anything, but he left immediately. And after that, he never went back into the forest. Valentin stared at him. Why? Nikolai looked down at his cigarette. Because of what happened to the footprint. Kostya was standing in the middle of a swamp. There was nobody around. No people, no animals, nothing. When the footprint began to rise slowly from the muddy water, the mud around it started bubbling. Do you understand what that meant? Valentin did not answer. Nikolai looked at him. It meant that something had just walked there, only a few seconds earlier. There it is. Put a like, leave a comment, give me a feedback if you like it. Bye.